You ever walk down a street and feel like the world's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen? That's how it was one golden afternoon in Willow Creek, a sleepy little town where nothing much stirs except the leaves. Old man Jack Sullivan, 82 years young, was shuffling home from the corner store, a paper bag of groceries cradled in his arms like it was his last lifeline. His hands shook a little, his back was bent like an old oak, and his white hair caught the sunlight, making him look like some kind of fragile saint. Across the street, though, a guy named Travis, mid-30s, arms inked up with skulls and snakes, eyes sharp as a switchblade, was watching him, smirking like he'd just found his next meal. Travis didn't know it yet, but Jack wasn't just some old-timer fading into the sunseed used to run with the Iron Reapers, a biker gang that made the highways tremble back in the 60s. Welcome to a story we're calling Echoes of Grit, folks, and if you're with me, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Jack was the kind of guy you'd pass without a second glance. Quiet, kept to himself, lived in a small house on Maple Street that always smelled faintly of gasoline and old leather. To the neighbors, he was just the widower who'd nod politely, maybe share a word about the weather. They didn't know about the scars under his sleeves, not from some clumsy accident, but from knife fights in back alleys and barroom brawls. See, Jack wasn't just a member of the Iron Reapers, been their enforcer, the guy who'd stare down a room full of outlaws and make him listen. But that was a lifetime ago. When his wife, Clara, got sick and passed, Jack hung up his colors, buried his past, and moved to Willow Creek to keep a promise to her: live quiet, live clean, grow old with peace. For 40 years, he'd done just that, sipping coffee at Rosie's Diner every Sunday, staring out the window like he was chasing memories of thunder and open roads. Nobody asked about his past, and he didn't tell. His silence wasn't fear, it was the kind of calm you earn after surviving a storm. That afternoon, though, the storm found him again. Jack was making his way down the cracked sidewalk, cane tapping a slow rhythm, his bag heavy with milk, bread, and a jar of instant coffee. The sun was low, painting everything in shades of amber, and he was lost in thought, maybe thinking about Clara, maybe about the life he'd left behind. Then he felt it, that old prickle on the back of his neck, the one that used to warn him trouble was coming. He glanced up, and there was Travis, leaning against a lamppost, his tattoos gleaming like a warning sign. Travis had that look Jack knew too well: restless, bitter, the kind of guy who'd pick a fight just to feel something. He'd been causing trouble in Willow Creek for months, ever since he rolled into town claiming he was starting a business. Word was, he was strong-arming locals, trying to carve out a little empire through intimidation. The neighborhood HOA, led by a busybody named Karen, had been whispering about him, stirring up tension, saying he was bad news. Travis didn't care. He saw Jack's slow steps, his shaky hands, and thought, easy mark. Hey, old man, Travis called out, stepping onto the sidewalk, blocking Jack's path. His voice was low, sharp, like a blade cutting through the quiet. Those groceries look heavy. Why don't you hand him over? Save yourself the trouble. Jack stopped, his face calm, almost too calm, like a lake before a storm. He'd heard that tone before: desperation dressed up as power. Travis wasn't hungry for food. He was hungry for control, for the rush of making someone smaller than him. A few folks nearby, a couple of kids on bikes, an older lady watering her flowers, started to notice, their eyes flicking toward the scene. Jack just held his bag tighter, saying nothing. Travis smirked, stepping closer. What's that, Pops? You deaf or just stupid? I said, give me the bag. His words dripped with mockery, and the crowd grew, uneasy, murmuring. To them, it looked like a mismatch of bully picking on a helpless old man. But Jack's eyes, steady and unblinking, told a different story. Inside, Jack was wrestling with himself. For 40 years, he'd kept his promise to Clara: no fights, no trouble, just peace. But peace, he knew, sometimes came at a cost. He could feel the old fire stirring, the part of him that used to break jaws and settle scores. Travis shoved his shoulder, hard enough to make the bag slip, an apple rolling into the street. The crowd gasped, expecting Jack to crumple. Instead, he steadied himself, his cane planted like a flag. Careful, son, he said, his voice low, rough like gravel. You don't know who you're pushing. Travis laughed, a cruel, barking sound, and leaned in, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "What's that, Grandpa? You gonna cry about it?" He shoved again, harder, and another apple hit the pavement. The crowd was frozen, some pulling out phones, sensing something bigger was unfolding. Jack bent slowly, picking up the spilled fruit, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. When he stood, his eyes locked onto Travis's, and for a split second, the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Those weren't the eyes of a frail, old man, they were the eyes of someone who'd faced down worse than a loudmouth with tattoos. "You're making a mistake," Jack said, his voice soft but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. Travis froze, just for a moment, caught off guard by the weight in those words. Then his pride kicked in, and he sneered, trying to shake it off. "Mistake? You think you scare me, old man? You're nothing." He jabbed a finger into Jack's chest, hard, expecting him to flinch. The crowd leaned in, hearts racing, waiting for the old man to break. But Jack didn't break. In one smooth motion, faster than anyone expected, he shifted his cane and caught Travis's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him yelp. It wasn't brutal, wasn't flashy, just precise, like a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Travis stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his face a mix of shock and rage. The crowd erupted in gasps, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Did you see that? Who is this guy?" An older man in the back, a retired mechanic named Pete who'd ridden with a club in his youth, squinted and muttered, "Holy hell, that's Sullivan. Jack Sullivan. Used to run with the Reapers." The name rippled through the crowd, and suddenly Travis's tattoos looked like cheap graffiti next to the scars Jack carried, hidden but real. Travis, red-faced, tried to save face. "You think that makes you tough, old man? You think you're still some badass?" He lunged, swinging wildly, but Jack was ready. He sidestepped, smooth as a ghost, and pressed his cane against Travis's chest, just enough to send him sprawling onto the pavement. The sound of his fall echoed, sharp and final. Jack stood over him, not gloating, not angry, just steady, his eyes carrying a quiet pity. "Walk away," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't want this." Travis scrambled up, fists clenched, but his hands were shaking now. He looked around, saw the crowd's eyes not on him, but on Jack, full of awe, some still filming. His pride screamed to keep going, but fear was louder. He spat on the ground, muttered a curse, and backed off, disappearing into an alley like a dog with its tail tucked. The crowd didn't cheer, not right away. They just stared, like they'd seen a myth come to life. A kid, maybe 12, ran up and handed Jack his spilled groceries, his eyes wide with hero worship. Jack nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Thanks, kid," he said, and started walking home, his cane tapping that same steady rhythm. Whispers followed him, "That's Sullivan, the Reaper guy, right?" But he didn't turn back. He hadn't wanted to show his past. Life had forced his hand. At home, he sat in his kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of an old fridge. He poured a cup of coffee, the steam curling like memories. Clara's face came to him, her voice soft in his mind. "Live for peace, Jack." He'd tried, God knows he had. But sometimes, peace meant standing your ground, reminding the world that dignity isn't something you give up. The next morning, word had spread. The videos were online, blowing up with titles like 82-year-old vet school's bully. Jack didn't care for the attention, but it found him anyway. 2 young vets from the local VFW showed up at his door, nervous but respectful. "Mr. Sullivan," one said, "we heard about yesterday. We want to know how you did it. Not the fight, but how you carry that kind of strength." Jack was quiet for a long moment, then invited them in. Over coffee, he didn't talk about the Reapers or the fights. He talked about Clara, about choosing to walk away from a life that took more than it gave. They asked him to speak at the VFW hall, and after some hesitation, he agreed not to boast, but to share what he'd learned. When Jack stood at that podium, the room was packed: soldiers, retirees, even Karen from the HOA, her usual smirk gone. He leaned on his cane and spoke, his voice steady, rough around the edges. "I made a lot of mistakes," he said. "Lived wild, thought strength was in your fists, your crew, your name. But real strength? It's knowing when to walk away, when to fight for something bigger than pride. My Clara taught me that." The room was silent, hanging on every word. When he finished, the applause wasn't loud, it was heavy, full of respect. Jack wasn't a hero to them, not in the flashy way. He was proof that courage doesn't fade with age, that dignity can outshine any fist. Weeks later, Travis showed up again, not with a sneer, but with his head down. "I was wrong," he muttered, barely meeting Jack's eyes. "Didn't know who you were." Jack just nodded. "Don't matter who I was, son. Matters who you're gonna be." Travis walked away, lighter, like he'd been given a second chance. And maybe he had. Jack became something of a quiet legend in Willow Creek, not for his past, but for what he stood for. Kids would stop by his porch, asking about the day you showed that guy. He'd just chuckle, shake his head. Wasn't about showing him up. It was about standing up for me. One evening, as the sky burned red and gold, a girl from the neighborhood, maybe 14, came by with a notebook. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, shy but curious, "what's the one thing you tell someone like me about life?" Jack leaned back, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Life's a fight, kid," he said, his voice warm-weathered. "But the real one's inside you. Win that, and you won't need to prove nothing to nobody." She scribbled it down, her face lit up like she'd found gold. Jack smiled, feeling a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. He'd come full circle from chaos to calm, from enforcer to example. Travis had tried to take his dignity, but instead, he'd given Jack a chance to show the world what it's worth. So what do you think, folks? Was Jack right to stand his ground, or should he have walked away? What would you have done on that sidewalk? Drop a comment. Share your thoughts. Let's talk about what strength really means in a world that's always testing it. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories that make you think, feel, and maybe even change a little.